This is a standard American IKEA, around 300,000 square feet, a one-way maze of fully furnished rooms, Scandinavian minimalism on every surface, and a cafeteria that sells Swedish meatballs. It feels universal, like IKEA figured out some global formula for how people want to live. But 8,000 miles away in India, that same company is serving biryani, selling stools low enough to sit on a floor mat, and designing sofas that can survive monsoon humidity. It's the same brand, but a completely different world. And today, we're going to look at what this tells us about culture, globalization, and what it takes to earn a market's trust. Before we get into the comparison, let's look at some context on why India matters so much to this story. IKEA entered India in 2018, and they didn't do it casually. They committed $1.5 billion upfront, and they have plans for 30 stores and dozens of digital hubs by 2030. They currently operate in 6 storefronts and are rolling out a new format called Likely, described as a destination for entertainment, social connection, and retail, not just furniture shopping. India is a strategic bet for IKEA because 65% of the 650 million person population is under 35 years old, which is a strong pull factor because these individuals are entering adulthood, forming families, and actively looking for better homes. So IKEA has a lot to gain in entering this market. Now, before looking at specific strategic decisions made by IKEA in adapting to cultural differences between the US and India, I want to take a quick look at 3 of Hofstede's cultural dimensions to understand the consumers that IKEA is targeting. First, on an individualism dimension, the US scores a 60 and India scores a 24. This gap mainly resides from the DIY model, the minimal staffing, and the self-service format, all of which flow from an individualistic design logic that assumes you shop alone, decide alone, and assemble alone. And while this works for Sweden and the US, it does have to be rethought when looking at India. Now, looking at the power distance dimension, the US scores a 40, while India scores a 77. And high power distance cultures expect hierarchical, attentive service because being well served carries a social meaning beyond just convenience. And this means that IKEA's post-purchase support plays a large influence in buying decisions for Indian customers. Now, looking at the long-term orientation dimension, India scores slightly higher than the US here too, meaning that Indian consumers are evaluating purchases through durability and long-term value and not just the immediate price. And this shapes how IKEA needs to communicate quality and not just affordability. And now that we've established a baseline of the 2 cultures, we can dive into IKEA's operations. In the US, stores are built around a very specific set of assumptions based on a low context culture. Communication is explicit, the store doesn't need to explain itself, and the entire model trusts you to be self-sufficient, such as getting a map, navigating the store on your own, finding an item number, pulling it from the warehouse, and assembling the products yourself. The US kitchen displays assume standard American appliance sizes with deep cabinets built for full-size refrigerators and dishwashers. The cafeteria keeps Swedish meatballs and lingonberry sauce on the menu as a cultural identity statement, and none of this is neutral. It's all Scandinavian American cultural logic exported globally as the default. But IKEA in India raises the question, what happens when the default doesn't fit? Now, IKEA's answer to that question started not just with product design, but with listening to consumer habits. So before opening a single storefront in India, they conducted local studies on sleep habits, family routines, and kitchen usage across Indian households. And what they found challenged almost every assumption the US model was based on. Indian kitchens, for instance, rarely have dishwashers, which sounds like a small detail until you realize that IKEA's European plates were specifically designed to be dishwasher safe and therefore weren't optimized for hand washing at scale. Furthermore, Indian beds required wider mattresses than European standard sizes. Sofa fabrics needed to handle dust and humidity levels that a Stockholm apartment wouldn't see. And the classic IKEA dining set, designed for a table and chair in a designated room, looked undersized in homes where dinner often meant that whole families squeezed around on a mat on the floor. IKEA wasn't just adapting products, but it was learning a completely different way of living. And the cafeteria tells this story most visibly. Swedish meatballs, which are IKEA's global signature, were never going to work in a country where the majority of the population holds the cow sacred and a significant Muslim population avoids pork. In a high-context culture like India, where food is tied to religious identity, family ritual, and community meeting, getting this wrong wouldn't have been a minor PR issue. It would have been a fundamental signal that IKEA didn't understand who was serving. So instead of beef meatballs, IKEA in India serves biryani, samosas, dal makhani, and masala tea. By 2023, their Indian stores were serving over 4 million meals a year, and this number tells you that the cafeteria became a destination and not just an afterthought. Turning from the cafeteria to shopping behavior and customer support is where we see larger differences between the US and India. In a low context culture like the US, a good retail experience is efficient. You find what you need, check out, and leave, where minimal interaction is required. However, India operates extremely differently. Relationship and personal attentiveness aren't just service extras, but they're a baseline expectation of a quality transaction. And research highlights that 62% of Indian consumers are willing to pay a premium specifically for good customer service. So this informed a lot of the decisions that IKEA made when opening their Indian storefronts. They started with over 950 employees, which is significantly more per square foot than a typical US location. They invested in customer service training specifically to bridge the gap between Swedish retail philosophy and Indian consumer expectations. And they did this in 25 languages because India isn't just one market, but hundreds of regional identities operating under one roof. Overall, IKEA's American store design is not universal. It is a low-context, individualistic American model that embeds specific assumptions about space, family structure, self-sufficiency, and service. Meanwhile, IKEA in India needed to relearn what a home, a meal, a shopping trip, and a service interaction fundamentally meant in a different cultural context. This side-by-side market comparison highlights how IKEA has learned to integrate its global commitment to affordable, stylish furniture that can be assembled by consumers with its desire to localize product sizing, food, and other offerings to suit the customer's needs. For IKEA, a multinational firm in the furniture industry operating in over 60 markets, a transnational approach is essential to success. Standardization has allowed IKEA to retain its core business identity and achieve economies of scale, while local responsiveness has allowed IKEA to be successful in its various markets, since the furniture that an individual places in their home closely relates to the culture one was raised in. And that balance between what the brand must remain and what it must become is the permanent strategic challenge that any company operating across cultures must face. And this is not just about the launch moment, but it's an ongoing process and a long-term commitment to staying culturally fluent. And this distinction is what separates companies that solely globalize from companies that are able to truly find that balance in achieving a transnational strategy.